students. Today I would like to discuss something very important, the Keynesian Transmission mechanism. Now in macroeconomics this is vital. Why? Because this theory derived by Keynes shows you the linkages between your monetary sector and your real sector. Two sectors totally different from each other but are interlinked into the economy. And if there's a shock in one of them, it will transfer to the other one and vice versa. Let me just give you a quick example. So in the real sector, let's say a factory closes down and 50 people lose their jobs. This will then transfer to the monetary sector, which includes the interest rates, bond and share prices, and the financial markets. Okay, so that's how, if some business closes down, it's actually seen within the interest rates, within the monetary sector, within financial, the market, and so on. So that is one way to go, from this side to this side. But there can also be an impact from the monetary side to the real side, where if something happens to share prices or interest rates, it will actually cause a deviation that will be transferred to your real sector, which is your people living and working and so on, the production side. So you can think of the real sector as the production side and the monetary sector as the money side. Okay, very nice example we use in the textbook. We say that the monetary sector is actually the oil and the checking of a car, which the real sector is the car. So you need both to drive, but the monetary sector makes sure that the economy, which is in the real side, runs smoothly. So we actually want to see today how something like the interest rates can actually influence your economy side and your employment and thus your inflation. Okay, so let's go into the theories today. So before I start with the graph, the free line graph, let me first explain what is under the real sector and what is under the monetary sector. So who controls the real sector? Okay, the real sector is controlled by the fiscal policy. Not controlled, but rather directed or influenced by fiscal policy. The fiscal policy, which is the government's policy. Okay, so the fiscal policy will influence the real sector. So they're actually in charge of actually then influencing the real sector and directing it into the way that's best for the entire economy. In the monetary sector, who's in charge here? Who needs to direct the monetary sector? Who needs to make sure everything is okay? The Reserve Bank. In South Africa, we call it the South African Reserve Bank. So these two institutions are actually in charge of their specific fields. The Reserve Bank in the monetary sector and the fiscal policy, which is the government in the real sector. And the Reserve Bank called their policy the monetary policy. Okay, so the monetary policy and the fiscal policy, the monetary policy directed by the Reserve Bank, the fiscal policy directed by the government. Okay, so there's the two policies, monetary, fiscal. Now, either the policy can be expansionary or restrictive. If it's expansionary, it's increasing the economy or expanding the economy. So we call it expansionary policy because it expands the economy. Okay, both of them will expand the economy if we call them expansionary. If you call them restrictive, then they restrict the economy. So they can either be, a policy can either restrict the economy, so make it smaller, and there is cases where you need that, and it can actually have an expansionary effect when it's called an expansionary policy where it grows and helps the economy grow even further. Okay. So two different institutions, two different policies, and then two different linkages between these two sectors. Okay. So let's get down to business on what a Keynesian transmission mechanism is and how Keynes derived a theory that shows how the monetary sector could influence the real sector and how the real sector could influence the monetary sector. Okay. Okay, so let's start with the three graphs that we also did in class, where I showed you how this transmission works. Okay, let's start at the monetary side, because like I said in class, this is a theory. You cannot change the order of the graphs. You keep it the same always, okay? Unless you think you can derive a new theory, you keep it the same. So, let's start with the first one, the monetary sector graph. Okay? So, in the money market or the monetary sector, how does the graph look? Well, interest rates on this variable, quantity of money on this variable, and then you have your money supply, money demand to show you the money market. Okay? In any market, How do you show your market? You do money or demand and supply. So let's do the money supply. Money supply is exogenous, meaning it's a straight line. Okay, a straight line. Only influenced by the Reserve Bank. So meaning it's exogenous, it can only be influenced by the Reserve Bank. Okay? Money demand, you can either draw it straight or as a bow line, but you can also draw it like this, money demand. Okay? From money demand, you then see interest rates. Equilibrium. And this is the quantity of money supplied. Okay? So, let's recap what's on this graph. Money demand, which has a negative relationship with interest or with quantity and interest rates. Okay. Money supply, which is just a straight line, meaning it's exogenous in the model. And then this point where they cut is your equilibrium point. Okay. And here is your equilibrium interest rate level and your equilibrium quantity of money. So this is the money market. Let's do the real market. How does a real market look like, or the real sector? Okay, you did this in chapter 2, so it's basically the same graph as chapter 2. You have your expenditure, you have your income, okay, and then you have your 45-degree line. Okay, 45-degree line, and then you have your expenditure, total expenditure or aggregate expenditure line, which is the C plus I plus G plus X minus Z. Okay, so here you can get your new equilibrium income level, which you should be able to calculate in chapter 2, but in this case we just draw it as YE. So this is your equilibrium income level. Now, we have our monetary sector, we have our real sector. How do we link these two graphs? Okay. Now here's the theory part. So this is the monetary theory part, monetary sector theory, the real sector theory. How do we link these two graphs to each other? And that's what we call, in the middle, I like to call a link graph. Okay. So let's look at this link graph. We draw one in the middle, and let's see how we can link this graph with this one. So let's take one variable, this side, and one variable, this side, that can be dependent on each other and can actually be influenced by each other. Okay. One key relationship we have in the economy is that interest rates could affect investments. Okay? If your interest rates increase, less people will invest in the economy. Why? Because companies invest the money they actually borrow. So if interest rates increase, it's more expensive to borrow, so they invest less. Okay? We can look at it from that side or the real side, where interest rate is the opportunity cost of actually investing into land and machinery. So if the interest rates increase, farmers will rather invest their money into land or into bonds and shares and invest their money with the interest rates than buying machinery to invest. Okay, so that's the two different ways that you can refer to in your textbook. But let's look at this negative relationship. So we take interest rates here, we take investments here, and now we have two variables, one from this side, one from this side, that links the two monetary and real sector. Okay. Now we know there's a negative relationship between interest rates and investment, so we just draw a negative line here. Okay, and now that will show us our link, because you can see the equilibrium interest rate, you can take it over, will give you an equilibrium investment level. Okay, so very important. So here's the graph, or the basis, or the skeleton, whatever you want to call it, for your Keynesian transmission mechanism. Again, stay with the theory. This is your number 1 graph. This is number 2. This is number 3. Whenever you need to draw it in a test. Okay, so let's do some practical case studies. Because this is not what we're going to ask in a test. We're going to ask you a case study. Okay, because that tests your knowledge of the economy and your knowledge of how the Keynesian transmission mechanism work. Okay, so here's the first example. The example is in green. That's the case study. Now, in the test or in exams, or mostly when you're studying economics, you'll have a little bit more complicated case studies. But in essence, this is a very easy one, so let's try this one because there's only a few that you can have, or different cases you can have. Now, before we start, I would just like to quickly talk about this. I'm not going to write it down. Let's talk about the instruments of the fiscal and monetary policy. Because remember I told you, you have a fiscal policy and you have a monetary policy. So let's talk about the fiscal policy's instruments, government spending and taxation. Those are the tools they use to actually have an impact on the economy. Now, monetary policy. What does the Reserve Bank use to influence the economy directly via the money supply? Now, let's think about it. Three of them. Firstly, repo rate. The rate at which the banks borrow from the Reserve Bank. Okay? So if you increase that rate, then your money supply will go down in the economy. Why? Because it's now more expensive for commercial banks to borrow from the Reserve Bank, so they decrease the amount of credit they give out. Okay? That's firstly. And vice versa applies when you actually decrease the repo rate, then you expand the economy. Okay, now reserve requirements. Let's talk about reserve requirements. That's the amount of money that commercial banks need to keep in excess of their lending outs. Okay, so they need to keep a certain amount of reserve when they borrow out money. Okay, and the Reserve Bank can then increase this number, let's say from 20 to 30%. So then the commercial banks need to keep more money for themselves or in backup, but they call it backup, and then they can borrow out less money. So if you increase the reserve requirements, commercial banks can borrow out less money, so credit is less, so money supply decreases within the economy. Okay? And then vice versa when the reserve requirements decrease. Open market operations, that's the buying and selling of government bonds by the Reserve Bank. So what do? They come to the commercial banks, they say, okay, you need to buy some bonds from us. The commercial banks buy the bonds from the Reserve Banks, and so they give them the money, so then money is taken out of the economy, so money supply decreases. Okay, so by buying the bonds, so the Reserve Bank, let's say the Reserve Bank sells the bonds to the commercial banks, then they're actually selling it. When the commercial banks or the Reserve Bank actually sells the bonds to the commercial banks, then they actually reduce the money in the economy. Okay, so you just have to think about it to a buyer and a seller here, and the seller is always, or the one is always the Reserve Bank, and the other one isn't. Okay, so the third one is the open market operations, where you have the Reserve Bank that sells or buys government bonds from or to the commercial banks. So let's say they buy government bonds from the commercial banks. So if they buy it from them, then they're actually buying it from them. So they are the Reserve Bank, they buy it from these commercial banks. So they're all actually taking money, or they actually put money into the economy. When they sell these Reserve Banks, then they're taking money from the commercial banks, so they're reducing the amount of money in the economy. So just be cautious on that one, the open market operations, and understand it when we talk about buying and selling. Sorry. Okay, so let's look at a graph. So the repo rate increases. If the repo rate increases, then commercial banks are charged more by the Reserve Bank, so that means they will reduce the money supply. And if you reduce the money supply, this is the money supply, so you shift the money supply to this side. Okay? So money supply is now shifted. Okay? From the money supply that is shifted closer to the zero, if you want to understand it, they shift it closer to the zero. Okay? Because it's decreasing, then your interest rates will increase to I1. So you can see that on a graph. The new equilibrium point is here, so the interest rates have increased. And now you can take it down to your link graph, and you can see that the interest rates increasing leads to a decrease in investment. Okay, just start by reading your graphs, and it will become easier. So you're increasing in interest rates decreases your investment. Okay, from a decrease in investment, let's look at what happens to the real sector, because this was a monetary shock, this repo rate. So what happened to the real sector? Okay, which variable will be influenced? Investment decreases, so this I will then decrease. Okay, and you decrease the entire line. expenditure line, you decrease. So C plus I plus G plus X minus Z, 1. Okay, so this is your new line. This was your old equilibrium income level. Your new one is here, I1. So you decrease this, and you know that your equilibrium level of income has decreased. So your total economy is actually decreasing in terms of production, expenditure, and income. Okay, what happens, very key here, what is the role of the monetary policy or the Reserve Bank? To contain inflation, okay, to aim for price stability. So why would they increase the repo rate? They would increase the repo rate if inflation was high. Let's say the inflation is 8% in South Africa, then the Reserve Bank will say, no, we need to keep it between 3 and 6%. So what do? They increase the repo rate to start this process, and in the end, the income decreases, and if your income decreases, here's very important, if your income decreases, people have less money to spend, so they demand less products, so the price of products will decrease, and thus your inflation would decrease. Okay, so the inflation decreases. So they used a restrictive monetary policy by increasing the repo rate because the inflation rate was too high. These are the type of questions you can expect, and we'll do more case studies like this in the future. Okay, so by increasing the repo rate, they decrease inflation. Okay, so that was the restrictive monetary policy. The other case is the expansion monetary policy, which I will explain now. This is the case of the expansionary monetary policy. Now, this can happen for any reason. The Reserve Bank feels they can actually, prices are low, so they can start by expanding the economy, they can implement an expansionary monetary policy. So, again, first off, before you even start these questions, you need to go and practice drawing your skeleton. Okay, this is the skeleton case for your Keynesian transmission mechanism, meaning it's what you draw before you even start by shifting graphs. Okay, so you need to draw this each and every time before you even do the crowding out or the Keynesian one. Okay, so let's look at it from the case study. The Reserve Bank buys government bonds. Simple. So they buy the government bonds, so they buy it from the commercial banks. Okay, so what do? They give the commercial banks money, so the money supply in the economy will increase. Okay, so now you can increase the money supply. So again, this is your money supply graph. You're moving away from the zero, so you're increasing money supply. Okay, if you increase money supply, what is your new equilibrium point? It's here, I1. So what happened to interest rates? Interest rates decreased. Okay, so interest rates decreased. Let's take it over to your investment side. As you can see, your investment side, the interest rates decreased, so investment would increase to I1. The investment increases, what will happen to your aggregate expenditure line? Your aggregate expenditure line will increase, C plus I plus G plus X minus Z. Okay, and that is your increase, and it shows also your increase in equilibrium income level. So exactly the opposite of the restrictive policy is the expansionary policy. Just here now, the money supply will shift this side and everything else changes. So if you can do one side, you can probably do the other side. Also, you just need to go and practice. Okay? What is expected in a test from you? I expect in a test that you will be able to draw this, but also explain it for a couple of marks. Now, the easy thing of the explanation, we normally derive into the primary and secondary effect, as you will go and study in your textbook. But normally what you do, you just go and explain what you drew, what you draw. Okay, so if you increase the money supply, you just state that and say decrease in interest rates, increase in investment, increase in total expenditure, and an increase in equilibrium income level. And what does that mean? The inflation rate will increase. Okay. So that's an expansionary monetary policy for you to go and practice, but we will have. Okay, so that was the Keynesian transmission mechanism with the monetary policy. So either your policy can be restrictive or expansionary. Now, those two cases I just did was the only two cases you can get in terms of your monetary policy. So the most important thing you need to identify is the instruments. What are the three instruments? What will happen to them? So if I tell you the reserve requirements increase, you need to know whether that's expansionary or restrictive. And then if you know it's expansionary, then you do the expansionary case. If you know it's restrictive, then you do the restrictive case. Okay, so you know your instruments, know if they're either expansionary or restrictive, and then read your case studies and identify that, and then either do the first one or the second one in terms of the expansionary case or the restrictive case. Now I'm getting to the third case study, and that is the crowding out. That is where we talk about a fiscal policy. Now, the easy thing here to understand is that normally the fiscal policy will only be expansionary because the concept of crowding out only deals with expansionary fiscal policy in this section. Maybe not in the real world, maybe not in all the theories, but for now we will assume that crowding out is just based on the expansionary theory of fiscal policy. So the crowding out concept won't change according to this theory. So let's draw it on our Keynesian graph. Okay? You have your three graphs. I'll draw the skeleton with you. So you have your three graphs. Again, you will have your money market with interest rates, quantity of money, money supply, money demand, interest rates. Okay. Then we'll have your interest rates and investment link graph. Okay. You can draw your equilibrium income or interest rates, and then IE, investment E. Okay. And then you can have your 45-degree line, and you can draw your aggregate expenditure, C plus I plus G, dot, dot, dot. Okay. We all know, and then equilibrium income. So this is again your skeleton. Notice that I didn't change the theory. When I went to physical, the skeleton of Keynesian remained the same in terms of the money market, the link, and the real sector. Okay, now let's go into crowding out. What does it mean? Now crowding out, let's define it. Crowding out means if the government spends more money, it's going to crowd out private investment in your country. So it's going to reduce the private investment in your country. That means that if the government spends money, then their impact isn't going to be as large as what I expected due to the decrease in investment. And I'll show you that now on the graph. So crowding out means the government is spending more money. Okay. So G increases. Government spends more money. So where's the government on this graph? Here, here, or here? G is here on the real sector side. So you don't start on the money side, you start on the real side. Okay? So you see government spending increases, so G increases, so you can increase the line, the total expenditure line, or autonomous expenditure line. So you increase the line, what happens to income? Income increases. Okay, so your entire line shifts up, your income increases. That's your primary effect. Okay, so your primary effect is done. The government spends more money, creates jobs, it creates production, it creates income, everything is nice. Okay, but that action will have a secondary impact on your investment. And let's look at it from this side. Okay, so the key variable or relationship to understand here is that if the income increases, then something will happen to money demand, because money demand is determined by income. Okay, so if income increases, people demand more money, more transaction money. So people demand more transaction money. So what happens? The money demand curve will shift upwards. Okay. If money demand shifts, this was our original point, the new point will be here. And your interest rates will increase. Okay. So money demand increases, interest rates increase, investments will decrease, and that's crowding out. Okay. Investments decrease, So, we didn't stop here. If investments decrease, what will happen to this line? Because this was your new line, C plus I plus 2. That's your new line, your new total expenditure line. What happens? Investments decrease, so your new total expenditure line will decrease to this point. Your new equilibrium income level will be this one, so you decrease your income level due to the crowding out effect. And that shows you the crowding out effect, where the increase in government spending decreases investment, and actually then decrease your total expenditure line. But again, the conclusion is the primary increase is always bigger than the secondary decrease. So that is the crowding out concept, and as I said, you need to be able to explain it, whatever you wrote on a graph, so go to the textbook and go and study that. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed everything here, and I hope this is good practice. Go and re-watch the videos. Again, it's not a replacement for a lecture, it's just some added information that you can go and re-watch and re-watch and re-watch, and make sure you understand the concept of the Keynesian transmission mechanism. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will post something up in a short while for the content we do next week.